Hello everyone and welcome to today's webinar on Teams adoption. My name is Kayla Elise. I'm the marketing manager here at MOQ Digital, and with me I have your presenter Andrew Higgs, or affectionately known as Higgsy. We're just going to give everyone a minute to kind of jump on, and then we'll get started.
Thanks, Kayla. That's great.
All right, Higgsy, it's past a minute past now, so we might get started if you want to take us away.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Before we get right into it, just let everyone know that the Q&A chat is open. So if you do have any questions throughout the session, please feel free to pop your questions in the chat, and Kayla and I will be able to answer them. Thank you very much, everyone. All right, we'll get straight into it. So the purpose of today's webinar, as part of the series of webinars that we're running at the moment, this one is on Microsoft Teams adoption. And what we'll be talking about primarily today is about some of the key messages and processes that you want to consider when obviously looking to adopt Microsoft Teams. Obviously, there's a couple of things that I'll cover around the COVID, how COVID has obviously affected the rate of adoption and forcing people to change, but primarily what a lot of the messaging throughout today's session is going to be about is consistent whether you are just starting your journey on Teams, or if you're looking to obviously drive that adoption and you're already using Teams. So for those who haven't started their journey yet, a quick recap, and I covered this in previous sessions, is what is Teams? And I won't spend too much time on this, but ultimately Teams is that hub for teamwork. It's that single pane of glass that you look through to access information and consume information, whether it be stored in SharePoint for that document collaboration, using that redefined process of Skype for Business, and also leveraging third-party applications that have been plumbed into Teams or built into Teams. The key advantages of Teams is obviously having that unified interface across the desktop and your mobile devices, as well as your meeting rooms as well. So having that streamlined, single, consistent interface that is unique, but also familiar for the end users. One of the other key advantages of Teams is the ability to do things such as live events like you are participating in right now, allowing you to obviously open those communication channels up to the broader business. You might have a CEO looking to run an update. Leveraging the Microsoft Teams live events will allow you to have that medium or platform to deliver those such events. And of course, obviously the application integration, as I mentioned before, leveraging obviously the Microsoft Power Platform and developing those Power Apps and using their Power Automate to automate those processes and create new defined processes within your business. So today we'll be talking about, in our MOQ digital process, the adoption and readiness of Microsoft Teams, specifically the adoption component and helping you charter that journey to adopt Teams and develop that adoption of Teams in your organization or Dyson. So when we're talking about the adoption, we're talking about creating a new culture of work. Ultimately, when you look at your organization today, you might find that you've got a plethora of information across the business. You might have different utilities and applications that you might be leveraging to consume that information, and that you have data stored in various places, and you might be using different devices such as your desktops to notebooks to mobile devices. And in order to containerize the information, it gets challenging when it's all spread across the different places. We appreciate that a lot of organizations have different business units and methods of working. You've got more mobile-based workers, you've got office-based workers, all the way through to the executive level. They all work differently, and so understanding how information and technology works for you today, ultimately will help you understand and how Microsoft Teams is going to greatly benefit the redesigning the way that you work and creating that new process of working through that single pane of glass. So Microsoft Teams isn't just Skype for Business rebranded. It ultimately is being revised and rebuilt from the ground up. The user experience within the Teams platform is significantly better than what you find within Skype for Business, and Skype for Business is very quickly becoming more legacy when looking at the capabilities that you had within Teams. Teams is branded as the fastest growing business application in Microsoft history. And if you look at the rate of adoption of the product in the last 4 to 6 months due to the coronavirus pandemic, you can see, and those that have been on this journey with Teams have seen the rate of change that the product has been bringing. They're absolutely smashing out the updates, delivering new and enhanced features in the Teams application, such as more than just 4 participant video feeds. You've now got up to 9, and in the next 2 months, you're going to have up to 49 viewable video feeds in a meeting. Teams is ultimately that focused on delivering that end user experience, ensuring that you've got that consistent interface across all your devices, mobile devices, tablet devices, desktop, meeting rooms, and allowing you to have that persistent and channel-based communication, allowing you to access your messages and continue that conversation, whether it be talking on the desktop, then getting up from your desk and moving away and having that conversation carry with you on your mobile device, having it be persistent so that the conversation follows you rather than having to get back to your desk and then resume that conversation. Microsoft's plan in the beginning of this year was to have more than 70% of its work of the Microsoft enabled workforce, so Microsoft customers, working remotely by the end of 2020. Now, this statistic came before the pandemic actually hit. And what's interesting to see is that we were forced this change, and with obviously having to get out of the office and start working from home, how quickly products such as Teams has helped businesses transform their workforce and enable them to collaborate and communicate and open up these new channels of communication. So having a modern workforce, 70% of the modern workforce working remotely by the end of 2020. It's not far off that, to be honest. It's pretty close. So when looking at developing a change management plan, so now we'll start talking about how you actually introduce change and develop a change management plan for deploying Microsoft Teams, or if you're looking at, or if you've already got Teams, how would you go about that next release cycle? I've spoken previously about Teams being a never-ending journey, given the rate of change in the product and new applications being integrated into Teams. Your Teams journey never actually ends. Your release cycles will have an end date, such as you might be looking to introduce telephony functionality into Teams. That project has a lifespan, but the Teams journey itself is never ending. So when you're looking at planning for success, whether it be migrating to Teams or that next release cycle, it's important to obviously understand what the key elements are. So obviously enlisting those project stakeholders, getting the executive buy-in, and making sure that you've got the relevant IT and change management parties on board to help you have the appropriate support to deliver the Teams project. Defining your scope goals and timeline is the next critical phase. So understanding what is the purpose of this engagement? What are we actually trying to do? You know, you might be looking to reduce your operational expenditure. You know, you might be looking to obviously reduce travel time for into the office and enable people to have these online meetings. So you're not having to obviously commit to, you know, 2 hours of traffic to and from the office, but being able to get people to engage better by having them join meetings from their home. Then the next stage is to look at your make sure that the business is equally technically ready for it, and also that the users are ready for this adoption. So when you think about the technical readiness, this is really ultimately ensuring that your network is ready for Microsoft Teams, that the firewalls are configured correctly, that the network has the appropriate bandwidth, whether it be over WAN services or internet delivered services, and it may require you to have to revisit how you're going to how your network architecture and how it's going to support Teams. This is an opportunity to assess whether or not SD-WAN solution is viable, but also put in some recommendations for end users for their home internet. You know, for those still using ADSL, you know, it's the meeting experience isn't going to be as enjoyable when you've got, you know, more than 5 or 6 video feeds on the screen. The bandwidth just isn't there for you to consume that, as well as obviously you got to factor in uploading your data as well. There's your video feed that you're uploading. So you're not going to be able to see all participants in that case. So putting some recommendations out to your staff around what these best supported internet services are available to you. Obviously, the push for the NBN has had its play here, and definitely during COVID, Telstra and the likes saw a massive uptake in NBN services to cope with the working from home environments. So the user readiness. So this is ultimately getting the right information out to the end users and making sure that your communication plan is executed. So I'll talk about communications plans a little bit later on, but it's making sure that your appropriate collateral and training material is available to the end users, and that training plan has been executed so that the staff are ready to start using the application. Or again, if you've already got Teams on the desktop, that next function, that next feature within Teams. You know, you might have got Teams on the desktop for meetings. You might be looking to start using the actual Teams and channel structure and file services within Teams. So making sure that the staff have been communicated to and have had the appropriate training to start using Teams for those collaborative functions. So deployment and implementation. So I can't stress this enough. Always pilot your next feature or next release of Teams. You know, one of the biggest challenges that we see is that people just turn Teams on, and you know, there's a lot of time is spent then obviously going back and turning things off and scaling it down so that the adoption is a bit more manageable. The idea behind introducing a pilot is getting those people that traditionally are fairly, I shouldn't say noisy, but the ones that will obviously give you the most feedback and are more likely to give you, whether it be good or bad, be able to give you that ongoing feedback with how that pilot's going to progress. So you might be looking to introduce Microsoft Teams for a meetings purpose, getting those staff and educating those staff on how to schedule those meetings. One of the great things about piloting it is that you as I've mentioned in previous webinars, you get that water bubbler conversation where people start going, hey, have you tried using Teams yet? No, I haven't started using Teams. What is Teams? Oh, you should check it out. It's absolutely fantastic. We've been using it for this project. And they start going, hey, I want to get involved with Teams as well. And they put their hand up and start putting themselves forward. And you start to get that pull effect to Teams. You're not pushing an organization and their staff to Teams. You know, you can let them know that change is coming, but as it starts to trickle in through the organization, people actually want to, you know, electively put their hand up and take part of a pilot. Operational excellence. So this is more, once you've defined your strategy, you've got the stakeholders involved, and you've migrated to teams, everyone's trained up and is starting to use it now. How do you ensure that you drive that excellence? How do you ensure that you've got people actually using the tools for what you set out to design them for? So driving the value and optimization and growth for teams is ultimately reassessing how you're actually adopting it and who's using it for what purposes. So Office 365 provides you with the capabilities of reporting on this to understand how your users are actually using Teams. So you've trained the business to use Teams from a collaborative function of using a channel-based model where you can communicate and have that persistent chat in the post tab, and you can then obviously track on how many people are actually using the channel-based function, actually communicating within channels, not just doing these one-on-one IMs, but actually working within a team and focusing on that teamwork function. So being able to report on that and then obviously assess how that's actually progressing, and then there might be an opportunity there to then how can we extend Teams? What service can we bring in, whether it be the Power Platform with Power Apps to further enhance that user experience. So I mentioned identifying critical stakeholders as well as also champions as well. So champions, I have to stress, champions aren't always necessarily IT people. It's every single business unit requires a champion. Teams, whilst the application would be delivered from an IT and engineering point of view, ultimately should have its own Teams champions across the business units. So if I was looking at finance, for example, you would hope that a Teams champion has been identified within the finance department to obviously handle all those finance questions related to Teams. What I mean by that is as you go through and start rolling out Teams across the various business units or start extending Teams by introducing new functionality, it's those site champions or business unit champions that are going to be critical in helping introduce this new functionality. You want the site champions and stakeholders to be that voice, to be the endorsers of change and so forth. What you don't want is having someone who's a champion but is resistant of change, someone who's not going to be able to wave that Teams flag or say that, look, IT want to introduce new meeting rooms with Microsoft Teams, but I don't stand for that. Those they're not the kind of people that you want as your champions. You want people that are going to be promoting change. They need to understand the impact of change as well for their business unit. So as I mentioned before, the communication plan does become critical in this instance, and developing that communication plan and understanding what needs to be delivered to the customer, to your end users, and the mediums that you're going to be using to deliver that information, whether it be the intranet or email, or you might even put posters up in the lunchroom. Reviewing and assessing your use cases as well, pushing out a product that has such a broad touch across your business. It's going to have different use cases, and understanding and profiling the business is mandatory in ensuring that the product is fit for purpose. So you might have field workers that don't necessarily participate in meetings, whereas office workers definitely schedule a lot of meetings. Understanding how Teams is going to benefit the field workers and the office workers is going to be critical in rolling the Teams product out. Again, I can't stress this enough. Pilot before rolling out. Always pilot. Make sure that you've got the right people and get that feedback. Get that continuous touch and check in with them on a regular basis to make sure that they're actually you actually evaluating the product in entirety. It's going to help you build those training plans as well. So you very quickly identify where those sticky points are and where that energy can be focused on building out that training plan. So you might find that the sharing of documents was a bit of a challenge for some people. So you could focus a lot of your training on how to adequately and appropriately share those documents within teams. One of the things that frequently gets overlooked, and this is becoming more obvious now, especially with the return to work programs, is that as people are starting to return to the office, and that as part of the COVID pandemic, they've gone ahead and deployed teams across the organization. But when they return to work, the meeting rooms aren't fitted out accordingly. So later on in this session, I'll touch on what some of those meeting endpoints might look like. But there's another consideration there around, with people returning to the office, how can we adopt teams in the meeting spaces and use our meeting spaces better for collaboration and unified communications. So the key topics when you're building that adoption plan, you need to understand who and when is going to be upgraded to Teams. So you might be using Skype for Business already, or you might be using some legacy file services and whatnot. When are you going to actually migrate these pilot groups? And when are you going to roll that out to the broader business? Who are we going to identify as our pilot groups, and getting them, communicating to them early? What resources do we need to develop to support the change? So, such as making sure that you've got the right collateral, the right posters, the right training documents. You might have a learning management system where you might want to build in modules focusing on that team's journey. The communication channels, as I mentioned before, focusing on how you're going to deliver this content. Is it going to be do you have an intranet where you might have information stored on there, which will tie into your learning management system? One of the things we've seen work very well in previous engagements is a lot of customers are employing what they call Teams Tuesdays. It doesn't have to be a Tuesday, but Teams Tuesday implies that you're running a lunchtime session, or it might be a 3 p.m. session, one day a week, just for half an hour, giving you those tips and tricks. And what we find is that, the training, a lot of people will participate in training. There'll be mandatory training that they have to engage in, and it's ultimately ticking a box, and they can say, yep, I've been trained in Teams. How much of that content actually sinks in is less than 50%, put it that way. And it's not until you start actually using the tools do you have an appreciation of what you learnt in that training. So Teams Tuesdays ultimately gives those people the ability to go to a 30-minute session and just have that refresher, be reminded of what those functions were during that training, and they don't have to be and they can be short and sharp. You don't have to be going into deep dive and highly technical. Just focusing on the functions that are relevant. The medium may also be used as a way to leverage getting updates out there about new things that are coming with Teams. As I mentioned before, Teams is quite regularly being updated with new exciting features and functions and whatnot. So what the Teams Tuesdays might be beneficial for is making sure that the organization is ready for that change and saying, yep, the client's going to be updated next week. This information is coming through. And what messages and programs are needed to be rolled out. So developing that communications plan. As I mentioned before, there's multiple ways for you to communicate to your business, whether it be using you might have an intranet, or you might have a blog post that you share internally. Yammer is frequently a great place to get communication going within our business. We at MAQ leverage Yammer a lot, and so when there's any company announcements or to help drive change within the business, we use Yammer to deliver that information to our global business. Digital and physical signage. A lot of the information that Microsoft provides you as part of your adoption pack includes information such as emails and posters, and these are pre-canned articles that you can attach your logo on and reword some of the messaging there to suit your organization to streamline that whole process. Emails and surveys are also great as well. Those that have used Microsoft Forms, you can very quickly spin up those feedback mediums to obviously get that feedback from your staff. And of course, as I mentioned before, those pre-canned emails that Microsoft can provide to obviously deliver that message about change. User guides are really good. We've developed a lot of our user guides, and those that have done engagements with us in the past around Teams would have received the user guides to that you can obviously rebrand yourselves to get the staff trained up. Training, of course, is critical. How you train your staff is ultimately a planning job in itself. Identifying the right people to train and the way that they're trained has to be persona based. You can't train a field worker the same way you train an office worker on using Teams. They're going to have different use cases. So back before, when I mentioned about profiling the business and understanding the way your business leverage unified communications and collaborative tools, that each are going to have their own use case. So making sure that your training is tailored to those profiles, that you're actually training them in the way they're going to use the technology. Same with the way that you actually get the content out there. So traditionally, a lot of organizations are going to be used to delivering training through classroom-based training. So ultimately, having people in the room and delivering that training model. Teams through live events such as this, or even just Teams meetings, it's really personable, and the ability to share your screen and walk them through how to use the client is great. There's now a platform for us to be able to deliver remote training. So Teams is going to play a critical role in you actually delivering training on how to use Teams. Snackable content. So again, training, as I mentioned before, Teams Tuesdays is that snackable content, and I've already got Teams Tuesdays listed on there. But it's a short 30-minute session on tips and tricks. Tips and tricks can also be delivered through. You might be in your sales meeting, and you might have a segment for 10 minutes about tips and tricks. So incorporating those tips and tricks conversations into your daily meetings and with your business units. You might have a finance meeting, and part of that session will be talking about what are some Teams tips and tricks that can help us work better. Accessibility considerations. So again, as I mentioned before, making sure that you're using the right platform for people to consume that information. One of the things that worked for us during the coronavirus pandemic was we leveraged a Power App within Teams to be able to consume that information. We could access that data of that could tell us, what our business standpoint is on the coronavirus and that company news, and also having that live feed from the Australian Health Organization, as well as also frequently asked questions. We leverage Teams in order to consume that information. And of course, Teams Tuesdays, as I've mentioned previously, are imperative to obviously delivering training and keeping that training going. So you've got Teams out there. How do we actually drive adoption? So Microsoft have a program called the Art of Teamwork, and this is not primarily focused on just Microsoft Teams. It talks about what teamwork actually is. Now, for a lot of businesses, teams have been working in silos where they've been working within just their business units. And the idea behind the art of teamwork is to understand that we no longer have to work just within our business units. We can now work across the business by bringing in various people around the business to focus in a single space for collaboration. So you might be working on a project that has finance, that might has some of the construction teams, some of the procurement team, and administration team as well. And of course, there's probably going to be some IT in there as well. So having everyone getting access to a central place to collaborate on files and documentation, and having a channel there for communication and chat, you're no longer working in those silos. So the art of teamwork is about helping you understand as a business how you can actually work better working across the business, developing teamwork, and not just focusing on a product such as Microsoft Teams. The Champions program, as I mentioned, as part of any project, recruiting those champions and having them beat their chest for teams within the business, and ultimately be those drivers and enthusiasts, evangelists for teams. They will play a critical role in driving that adoption and getting people pumped and excited for using Teams. Along with obviously the ongoing and developing training material that Microsoft has available to everyone, there's Microsoft Engineering webinars as well. So these Microsoft Engineering webinars are ultimately a platform for you to listen in, Microsoft experts telling you about some tips and tricks and new advantages of using Teams in unique scenarios. A lot of the time, the webinars are focused on real-world scenarios. So you'll be, it might be the medical industry and how the medical industry has been using Microsoft Teams to help with patient care and patient records and so forth. Driving adoption is about getting. I'll use the example here for migrating away from Skype for Business or upgrading from Skype for Business. It's getting users to the end state, and that end state in this instance is Teams only mode. Teams only mode I refer to as the coexistence mode within Office 365. A lot of the time when people are considering going to Microsoft Teams, out of the box with Office 365, you'll be in islands mode. So if I was to deploy an Office 365 tenant today, more than likely there won't be any Skype for Business available to me in that tenant. However, if you've been using Office 365 for the last few years now, and you've seen Skype for Business and you've been using Skype for Business and you want to get off Skype for Business, this is the state that you want to get to. So planning to get to Teams only mode is very relevant for those customers that are using Skype for Business today. So Skype for Business still has a purpose for a lot of organizations that might have an on-premises telephony deployment. Teams only mode is where we want to help you get to by leveraging Teams as your telephony platform, and or if you've been using Teams as that on-premise or Skype for Business Online meeting platform, helping you get to Teams only, so you're using Teams for those meetings as well. Some of the other considerations, as I mentioned before, especially when returning to work, is the meeting rooms. A lot of the time, the meeting rooms are overlooked, and we want to help a lot of organizations repurpose those meeting rooms for Microsoft Teams. So we obviously appreciate that you might have an existing Cisco WebEx deployment, and you've recently rolled out Microsoft Teams as part of COVID, and you want to be able to use your Cisco devices in Teams meetings. Well, that is possible, and you don't have to get rid of all of your Cisco equipment in order to do that. So that might be one use case. Or you've got meeting spaces, but they've just been those traditional meeting rooms with a monitor and haven't been video enabled. So obviously, by leveraging the appropriate endpoints in the room, such as the poly endpoints I've got on the screen here, we can enable those meeting rooms for Microsoft Teams as well. So the key message there is, regardless of the fact if you're using Cisco endpoints or if you're using a life size or even legacy Polycom endpoints, helping you bring those endpoints into Teams is possible with the appropriate services. And likewise, looking at the way that you're using those meeting rooms now and the advantages that you would get from upgrading those meeting spaces by video enabling them, ultimately gives you a better experience. The very quickly, as part of the whole working from home lifestyle came about, the importance on having video turned on became detrimental in having good quality meetings. The working from home session that I ran back in March on how to work from home, one of the first things we spoke about was turning on video, making sure that you turn on the video to make sure that your meetings are a lot more personable. You don't have a meeting in the office talking over a wall from each other. Meetings just don't work like that. So take down the wall, turn your camera on, and introduce video into your meeting rooms to obviously enhance that meeting experience. So how do we get there? How do we actually get you onto Teams? So how do we extend Teams, and how do we take you from where you are now to where you want to be? How do you get you from point A to point B? MOQ are running our MOQ Microsoft Teams assessments, and out of these Teams assessments, you're basically getting a free 3-hour workshop, give or take, with myself, and I'll help charter your journey to Teams. If you're already on Teams, let's talk about how we get you from where you are now to where you want to be. You might be looking to use the Power Platform more. You might have some existing business apps that you want to start integrating into Teams. It might be SharePoint forms that have been now a bit long in the tooth, and you want to convert them into Power Apps that you can consume through Teams. And a lot of the time we find that customers already have got an idea of where they want to go, but they're unsure of how to get there, or in most cases they've turned Teams on, but they're unsure whether or not it's secure and if the governance has been employed. So out of this Teams assessment, we can help you obviously chart that adoption journey, look at how you're using your existing unified communication services such as telephony and meeting rooms, and how we can bring those forward into Teams meetings. We talk about extending Teams and introducing those Office 365 applications such as Microsoft Planner and soon to be released Microsoft Lists, and how they can help benefit your organization as well. You might have existing CRM platforms or ERP, HR, or IT processes that you want to look at streamlining and leveraging Teams for that. The power of Power Apps and bots as well. You might have those processes where you password resets are the biggest burden on the service desk. Well, let's develop a bot that can help with that process. You might have a staff member that needs to reset their password, and they can simply just type in a command within the Teams client, and a bot will start talking them through the process securely to reset their password. Finally, the other thing that we would cover in the Teams assessment as well is obviously how you manage your Teams environment moving forward. Lifecycle management services have been critical in ensuring that your Teams environment is ultimately rock solid. You want to make sure that the teams that have become orphaned when ownerless, that they actually are getting archived accordingly, or getting a new owner promoted. That teams that have just been created, we see it nearly every single day, organizations with teams that are called test team or test 1, 2, 3, and you have all these test teams that never actually get cleaned up. So creating those lifecycle management services around cleaning up teams and ensuring that you understand their team's purpose very quickly becomes relevant when looking at managing teams. Obviously, there's the meeting room endpoints as well, and through leveraging MOQ's managed services, we can help you take over the ownership of those meeting rooms, ensuring that they are obviously patched and running efficiently, and also tie the lifecycle management services into that managed service as well. So that gives you a bit of an overview as to what the Microsoft Teams assessment is all about. We want to help you get from where you are now to where you want to be. And so what we may find is that in that 3-hour session with myself, if we need to go dive a little bit deeper for services such as you might have SharePoint on-prem and you want to migrate that to SharePoint online and consume that data through Teams, then we might need to get in under the hood. So obviously, with that being a bit longer and a bit longer of an engagement, we could, pending Microsoft approval, seek funding for that and help you understand what is your information architecture look like? Where are you storing data now? How can we get you from using the legacy file services on-prem on your file servers and SharePoint on-prem and migrating them to the cloud? So chartering that cloud journey for you from a data and information architecture point of view. Cool.
So Hixie, you mentioned the dreaded C word before, COVID.
Yes.
A lot of businesses have obviously been forced into BCPs and things like that, or and they've had this kind of working from home lifestyle thrust upon them. Mm-hmm. What would be your top 3 recommendations for driving Teams adoption during this period? Obviously, yes, they've adopted it, but what would be kind of your top 3, given that they haven't had a chance to prepare?
Right. So so you've got Teams in your environment now. You've turned it on, and you're unsure whether or not it's being adopted well. The key things that I would recommend here would be to review the existing statistics of your in Office 365 reports and understand how the staff are actually using Teams. Very quickly, by reviewing these reports, you will be able to identify where those gaps are, and you can very quickly understand that you might have certain business units that aren't using Teams in the way that it was intended, and you can then obviously tailor a training program around helping those staff develop those necessary skills to use Teams more. You might find that a lot of them aren't using Teams meetings and are still going back and using the telephone to organize those meetings, or using a teleconferencing service. Ultimately, Teams can obviously, given the fact that it's already been deployed and is available to the end users, helping them obviously understand the use cases and develop that training for that staff. So reviewing those Office 365 reports is one thing. With obviously returning to work becoming more relevant now, this would be my second thing. I would say review the existing meeting environments at the moment and understand how video enabling those meeting spaces would help people use the technology more. The great thing about Teams is that obviously having that consistent end user experience from the desktop to the mobile, introducing new video endpoints in the meeting rooms. They're already familiar with the icons and the color schemes and what Teams looks like. So getting them to adopt the meeting rooms is going to be a very quick win for them. So enabling as part of your return to work strategy, enabling those meeting rooms for video conferencing would be one thing. And the last thing would be to do a Teams assessment with us. So obviously, by doing a Teams assessment with us, we can help you develop that adoption strategy, help you obviously bring in more functionality and extend Teams and understand how you can upgrade the organization from where you are now to where you want to be. And the Teams assessment is critical in making sure that you guys have a better understanding of where you want to go with Teams.
And it's also great for enabling those champions a little bit more, isn't it, Higgsy? Like, you know, those people that may not be quite sure on what the next steps are, and you know, they've had this responsibility put on them. You know, I think that's where we really see the value for our customers, is helping them, you know, enabling them, empowering them, and that's essentially kind of where we see the biggest value.
That's exactly right. We find that leveraging the right communication channels and providing the appropriate training that is tailored to the different personas that are defined, those champions find it a lot easier to work within their teams to help drive that team's adoption.
Alrighty, well, we had no more questions come through. That was the only one for today, but as always, you will receive a follow-up email with all of the slides, and you're more than welcome to reach out to us if you have any particular questions in regards to adoption. And just a cheeky reminder that we do have the third instalment of this webinar series in a fortnight's time, and that one will be on callings and meetings, isn't it, Higgsy?
That is correct, yes. We should be, that should be a really exciting one, because we get to get under the hood of callings and meetings, and also video interoperability as well, and understand technology around direct routing and using your existing telephony providers and enhancing your Teams environment with telephony for services.
Awesome. So we'll leave it there. Thanks everyone for coming along, and we hope to see you at the next one.
Thank you very much.